Tetragrammaton.
Very fortunate because I never got an education, so all I did was read all the time.
What are your thoughts on education in general?
Well, it's interesting that you should say that because for years I wanted to write a book about education. My wife said, please don't. So I did. And I imagined this school, prep school in New England, and I wrote the memoirs of a fellow who had been the headmaster for 50 years. And who knew the
fictional story.
Yes, all fictional. And so I put all my ideas about education into the education.
What's it called?
It's called Some Recollections of St. Ives. I'm very, very happy with it.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah. I spent my life thinking about education because I didn't have any. And I went to the Chicago public schools. It was very traumatic for me because everyone said I was stupid. And they kept putting me in remedial reading classes and never opened a school book. And so I grew up thinking it was really, really stupid. But at the same time, they were putting me in remedial reading classes. I was reading all the time, but I never put the two things together, that I was actually getting an education, but I wasn't getting it in the school.
You weren't getting their education. You were educating yourself.
So what were they educating me to do? They were educating. Looking back, it would have taken about 1,000th of the energy and the psychic reserve to just do the stupid fucking exercises. But it never occurred to me. And I think it didn't occur to me because my main trick was being stupid. That's what everyone told me what I was. And so I was very good at it, right? So I said,
you used it to your advantage.
It was a world I was comfortable in.
So would you say it gave you freedom?
I don't know if it gave me freedom, no, but it was bearable. It was more bearable to think I understand the world, I'm stupid, rather than I don't understand the world and everybody who's in a position of authority is wrong.
Yeah. So
then I spent a lot of time thinking about education, and I went to an acting school, and I was thinking about the way that education took place because I didn't understand what they were doing, and it didn't make any sense to me. And then I started a couple of acting schools, did a lot of directing. And so I've always been thinking about how people learn, how I learn, what is education. For example, one of the things you'll see in the book, it's all anecdotal. And the guy shows up and he says he was a prisoner of the Japanese in World War II, and then he was in Manchukuo, and he was a prisoner of the Russians, and he learned Japanese and he learned Russian, and because they let him get some books, he learned Greek and Hebrew and Latin. And he shows up and he says to the guy, I'd like a job at this school teaching languages. And the guy says, well, what language can you teach? And he said, I think I can teach whatever you want. So the guy says, well, do you have any degree? The guy said, I don't have a degree. But he says, I'll tell you what. He says, the classical languages. Tomorrow morning, he says, you choose Latin or Greek. The guy says, okay, Greek. He says, good. He says, give me your worst students at 8 o'clock in the morning. I just have one stipulation. Don't feed them anything. The guy says, okay. He says, come back at 4 o'clock. They're going to be speaking Greek. So the students come up and they haven't eaten anything, and they're sitting there, and the guy's got a big plate of scones. He looks at the scones and he says, food. He says in Greek, food. And he says in Greek, stand up. He points at the guy. The kid stands up, and he says in Greek, you want food? You want food? And the kid says, yeah. He says in Greek, say it. The kid says, I want food. And the guy says, good, come have a scone. And so the kid sits down and someone else says, I want food. So the guy says in Greek, you want food too? The guy says, say it, I want food too.
In Greek.
And so the kid eats the thing. And so he says to the kid, good? And the kid says, yeah, good. So at the end of the day, they're speaking Greek. And what he does halfway through the day is he starts writing it down, the words in the Greek alphabet. Food, and he writes down the word for that. Good, he writes down the word for that. Because what the guy figured out is all prisoners must learn to speak the language of their captors immediately. And the way they learn is they don't eat. So they have to learn to pay strict attention. And the way languages are not taught, you can study French for 5 years and know nothing, but if you're there for 3 weeks, you're going to speak the language, because the language that you're trying to learn is accompanied with gestures, and you understand the gestures, that the person who's speaking the language is trying to communicate with you, trying to help you communicate. And so the headmaster says, they learn the alphabet too. Isn't it hard? He says, every 15-year-old boy loves codes. It's just a code. So my life as a teacher, and as, I suppose, as a thinker, and certainly as a director, is how to teach. How do we actually learn? And what's the test? Like, we send kids to college starting in my generation. They say, well, they're going to become more themselves. They're going to be open to the world, or they're going to become exposed to other. Well, that's bullshit, because there isn't any test. So if the test is you're going to be able to speak French, you're going to be able to do calculus, that's a test which can be applied to the school, to evaluate the school. But if you're going to become more yourself, or you're going to become more open to other blah, 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 the kid realizes that's nonsense. I'll go along with the gag, but it's just nonsense.
So how does that apply to the arts? How does it apply to directing?
What applies to directing is you have to understand what you're asking the person to do, and it has to be something that can be done. The real trick to directing actors is you really don't have to do anything. The actor understood the script when he read it. There's nothing more to it than that. The actor simply shows up and says the lines with an objective somewhat like that.
Is that all there is to it?
Yeah, that's all there is to it. And I've worked with the greatest actors in the world, and whether they're conscious of what they're doing or not, that's what they're doing. So people say, do you spend a long time directing your movies? I said, I don't spend any time directing my movies. The actors show up, but you know what the script about because they read it. I say, you got any questions? No? Okay, go. And it works just fine. So I realized from working with other directors and myself as a playwright that most directors have no idea what they're doing. They're just, they come out of the English department, because what the director's job is, in addition to designing the scenery, is to keep the actors from tripping over the scenery and to stage them in such a way to increase the audience's enjoyment through the staging. For example, if you're the audience, most directors have the actors talking like that to each other. Those guys can't see them, those guys can't see them. Everything should always be in a diagonal, and you can move the actors so that the person talking has the attention of the audience. And if you don't, you're not doing your job. So the job of a director used to be called stage manager.
Did the director start as the stage manager? Yeah. That's what it evolved from?
Yeah, and the job of the stage manager was to make sure that no one's going to upstage the star and to move them around. It's a very, very simple job. And the whole thing's changed in the end of the 19th century with the Stanislavski. And he thought that we had to investigate the character and find the inner meaning of the character. There isn't any inner meaning of the character, just actors saying lines. It's just like, after you listen to Glenn Gould play Bach, everyone else sounds like bullshit, because his unspeakable genius is, to the best of his ability, playing the music and getting himself out of the way. So the idea of interpreting music or interpreting...
I feel like Glenn Gould interprets Bach, because if you listen to other people play Bach, they play it more just the notes, and he's playing the notes, but he seems to be reinterpreting it in a way that others don't.
Yeah, well, one can certainly make the case. Yeah, but that's how I understand it. So the job of a director is basically to say, pick it up and knock it off, right? Because the actors get it.
Yeah. Would you say the words of the play, that's it? Is it all in the words?
Well, where else would it be?
I'm asking.
Well, my question was rhetorical. Where else would it be? If you pick up a script and shake it upside down, the character's not going to fall out. It's just words. So people talk about how difficult it is to do Shakespeare. Quite the opposite is true. It's the easiest thing in the world.
You just say the words.
You say the words.
Yeah.
The purpose of the words is to have the speaker affect something in the other person. It's not to communicate ideas, right? So if I'm trying to get something from you, which is what all drama is about, if I'm smart, I'm going to tell you to the best of my ability what I think is more likely to get a response out of you. Most people say, I'm going to get a response out of them. I'm using my words to make them understand what I want out of you.
So if you just focus on the character you're playing against and say it to them, that's the actor's job.
Yeah, you don't even have to focus.
Just do it.
Well, you have, listen, it's like, I always say people sitting watching a television show in a bar, and somebody comes up and says, oh, what's happening? And the other guy says, oh, yeah. She was just discovered cheating on her husband, and that's her best friend, and she's trying to get him to tell her it's okay. That's all you need, right? They aren't going to say, well, as I know and you don't because I saw the first hour, she had a very difficult childhood. And she has all these characteristics. See, for example, if you look at movies and television, almost all of it is narration. It's people talking about something that happened before. You know, geez, I know why I'm telling this. When I was young, my kitten got run over by a dump truck and Or we really need to do this, Jim, because as you know, if we don't, the blah blah people are going to take over the thingy over there. They're explaining to each other. Understanding drama is really understanding what the audience wants, which is actually kind of easy because we were an audience before we were dramatists.
Do you write like you talk?
I hope so. I have a bit in my book, Recollections of St. Ives, where one guy wants to teach history. He says, here's how we're going to teach history. He says, the best history book in the world is a flea market. He says, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take the kids to the flea market. I'm going to give them each a $5 bill. I'm going to say, buy something. And tomorrow, come in and tell me all about it. So they come in and tell me all about it. And he says, okay. He says, then if I say to them, stand up and just tell me about it in your own words. And I say, good. Right now, write it down. They just learn creative writing. Because that's all creative writing is, right? It's telling it in your own words.
So when you're writing a script, do all the characters speak the same way?
No, of course not. My mind is a raging fire. Everybody speaks different, because I get to dress up like they do. But if you think about it, when we fantasize, as we all do, all the characters in our mind speak differently, don't they?
Yes.
Same thing. It's just writing down fantasies.
When you imagine a character, do you have a person in mind or an actor in mind when you're writing, or no?
No, just picking it up.
No imagery in your head?
No.
Tell me what your process, how it actually works.
I write it down. I'm making it up and I'm writing it down. And I was thinking about Bach, if you listen to the partitas and so forth. As a musician, tell me if I'm wrong, it's obvious that he's just transcribing an improvisation, right? So does he say, oh, this and that?
I think most music is written that way. It all starts as improvisation. It doesn't start theoretically, if that's what you're saying.
Right.
It's not intellectual.
Right. But I'm saying that I don't think he wrote down and said, I'm going to do the treble clef, I'm going to do the bass clef. Oh, what happens after 16 bars? No. Sounds to me like he's sitting down at the piano for it and then writing down what he's playing.
And that's your experience of writing, same thing.
I think so. What do I know?
Before you start the story, how much of the story do you know?
Sometimes I know a lot, and that's wrong. And sometimes I know a little. I got to figure it out. Because at the end, it has to be an equation. One thing is, I found very upsetting about modern music is it doesn't resolve. Most of it is it's a chant, where it's the same 4 bars played over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's elevator music, but we miss our beloved cycle of fifths, don't we? We miss our resolution. if there's an extraordinary resolution of music, it's just like an extraordinary resolution in drama. You say, I never thought of that. But wow, yes, now I see.
In a world of artificial highs and harsh stimulants, there is something different, something clean, something precise. Athletic nicotine. Not the primitive products found behind convenience store counters. Not the aggressive buzz that leaves you jittery, but a careful calibration of clean energy and focused clarity. Athletic nicotine. The lowest dose tobacco-free nicotine available. Made entirely in the USA. No artificial sweetener, just pure, purposeful elevation. Athletic nicotine is a performance nootropic. Athletic nicotine is a tool for shifting mindsets. Athletic nicotine is a partner in pursuit of excellence. Slow release, low dose, gradual lift, sustained energy, soft landing, inspired results. Athletic nicotine, more focus, less static. Athletic nicotine, more clarity, less noise. Athletic nicotine, more accuracy, less anxiety. Athletic nicotine, from top athletes pushing their limits to artists pursuing their vision. Athletic nicotine offers the lift you've been looking for. Learn more at athleticnicotine.com/tetra and experience next level performance with Athletic Nicotine.
Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Tell me, what do you remember about the idea for House of Games?
I was doing this movie for Bob Rafelson and Jack Nicholson. Postman always rings twice. We were shooting in Santa Barbara and I was living over here. And I would commute back and forth in my wonderful little 1968 Carmen Ghia, best car ever made. And I was listening, speaking of Glenn Gould, to Glenn Gould play the C minor toccata. And it's 6 notes, right? It's C minor from C to A. That's all da 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 da. So it modulates and blah 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 blah, and it keeps going on and on and on in ways that that are so inevitable and so shocking. And I thought, wow, I wish I could write like that. So that was kind of my inspiration.
The idea for it being about con men?
Well, I spent a lot of time in that world by accident growing up in Chicago. I spent a lot of time playing poker with criminals, and I also spent a lot of time working in phone rooms.
What's a phone room?
A phone room was a boiler room in the old days. You're selling, for example, imaginary land in Arizona, one of the places I was working, and there's 25 guys there. They're each on the phone, and they're given very bad leads, sometimes actually cold calling out of a telephone book. And they're trying to set up a date with you. I say, oh, Mr. Ruma, hi, is this Richard Ruma? Yes, thanks. Oh, my name is Dirk Bogart, and I work with the Glen Realty Company. I understand that you or someone in your family put in your name as someone who is interested in making a profit in land. Is that true? If that's true, what I'd like to suggest to you, your name has been picked at random out of a pool, and the president of our company is going to be in town just this afternoon. And he'd like to talk to you to get your ideas about how to form this program. What would be a better time for you? Would it be 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock? And of course, your wife would be with there. So I did that, and I sold carpets over the telephone.
So you had these jobs?
Oh, yeah. And it was a really interesting world to me, because there's the salesmen, not the people in the boiler room, but the salesmen, they call them sales bums, right? A lot of them lived in a hotel. You know, a lot of them were drunk and addicted. And a lot of times they didn't know and didn't care what they were selling. They just were great at selling. And then I started playing poker with a lot of guys who were criminals and hanging out with them and listening to them talk and so forth.
How old were you at that time?
I don't know, 22, 23, something like that.
And what were your thoughts going on at that time? Was it just, this is really interesting? Did you feel scary? What were your thoughts?
I was just living my life. It was never, I remember I went to this hippy-dippy school. It wasn't really even a college, but it pretended to be. And I went to visit a friend from high school who was at Harvard. This person was from Harvard. So I went down to Cambridge and went into Harvard Yard. And it was one of the most stunning experiences of my life. I looked around, I saw all these people my age who had a life, and they had support, and they were made. They didn't have to worry about, I always looked from hand to mouth, because I didn't have any career, I didn't have any skills, didn't have any contacts. But these people were they were made. That was it. And it was stunning to me. So, I guess my great motivator has been two things. One, I was given a gift, so I'd be a fool not to use it. And the other was I was always terrified of poverty.
Yeah. When did you become aware of the gift?
Well, I woke up one day, I started writing, and then I wrote these little sketches. I used to work at Second City in Chicago, not on stage. I worked as a busboy, and I worked as a piano player for the kids' shows. And I saw the sketches that they were doing, improvisational comedy. And then I started reading Pinter's sketches. And I thought, oh, it's the same thing. What they're both doing is writing this tragico-comico blackouts. And then I discovered Chekhov, and that's what he's doing. None of his plays have a plot. They have a setting, and they're all like 7 to 12-minute tragico-comico blackouts. So I said, well, hell, I can do that. So I did. And one thing led to another, and I started writing plays, and I liked it.
Who were your contemporaries at that time?
Well, my contemporaries at that time were the people that I was working with in the theater in Chicago, among them William H. Macy, and among them Malkovich, a little bit younger than I am, and Gary Sinise, they're both a little bit younger than I am. And a lot of those guys, they became very well known. Macy among them, Billy Peterson, who did NCIS or Law and Order, one of them, whatever the hell he was doing. And Meshack Taylor did Designing Women. And also Warren Casey, who wrote, with Jim Jacobs, he wrote Grease. So we were in a little theater the size of this, and he was in a garage across the street doing Grease. And then Stuart Gordon was there with the Organic Theater, and people from New York started coming and saying, geez, what's going on here? So,
how do you think it was different than what was going on in New York?
Well, it's completely different because none of us saw a career. It was just what we were doing. There was no money.
There was no upside.
No, there's no upside. I didn't have the time of our life.
Yeah.
And everybody was working a different job and putting the money into the theater companies. Because why not? It was the Beatles. It was the greatest experience of my life.
Yeah.
And we were in these rundown neighborhoods of transition, and the people started coming from the neighborhood. And they'd come up to you on the street. They said, Dave, I saw that play you did last week. It was really good. It was so wonderful. It's just like, that's the way that you talk to the plumber or the butcher or something like that. Fucking loved it.
Good job.
Yeah, good job. Well done.
Yeah.
That's very Chicago, right? Nobody's impressed by much of anything.
Yeah.
My dad used to say New York's the biggest hick town in the world, which I think has proved to be true.
How else do you think Chicago informed who you are?
Well, my parents were first generation. They were born right off the boat.
How did they end up there? Do you know?
Yeah, some of the Mamets went to Ellis Island and went to Brooklyn, and some of them went to Montreal and came down through the lakes and ended up in. But as usual, somebody knew somebody in the Landsmannschaft, right, the informal self-help organizations. But they used to say if you can't work in Chicago, you can't work anywhere. So I don't know if that's true now, but it was then. They did every job in the world because you could always go get another job. But one thing about Chicago was that the American literature of the 20th century all came out of Chicago.
Really?
Yeah, every bit of it. So that was the tradition that
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, that's the tradition that I grew up in. And I used to go cut school and go to the library in downtown, just read. And I loved the Chicago ones, Willa Cather and Dreiser and Frank Norris and Ben Hecht, who wrote the front pages and, the transformative American play, and on and on and on. Nulla Larson, who wrote Passing, and Richard Wright, black and white. And, for example, B. Traven, who wrote The Jungle Now. Hemingway came out of Chicago, for Christ's sake.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's all Chicagoan.
I always hear the expression, the machine politics in Chicago. What does that mean?
Well, Chicago was always a machine town. It was run by the Dailies, and it was a democratic machine town. The question is, As Joey Montaigne and I say, you don't want to live in a town where you can't fix a parking ticket. Who do you got to talk to around here was always the question. Working as a cab driver, we were always getting shipped down by the cops. And it was clear if you worked for anything in the city, you had to kick back part of your salary, right? And if you wanted to get the streets cleaned, you had to vote Democratic and blah, blah, blah. It was very clear, but there was nothing hidden about it. So when I grew up, I found it odd that people didn't understand how politics worked, right? That it was people with a good idea who were going to get taken advantage of by the people who got into it for the money. And then it was all about power, and that the purpose of the Constitution was to protect us from the government. It was not the job of the government to do good, because, I don't know how to do good. I think about it all the time, and I'm a huge sinner. Why would these schmucks who are getting into it to steal have a better idea about how to do good? So it's kind of stunning to me that a lot of people don't, some are coming to realize it.
What do you know about the Great Chicago Fire?
Well, one of the things I know is that because of the Great Chicago Fire, I think it was 1903, 1906, it was impossible to build a theater in Chicago. We couldn't do it. The fire laws were too strict. Then, for some reason, in the 70s, the fire laws were relaxed. And because they were relaxed, our little neighborhood, right around the corner from Wrigley Field, these little theaters sprang up. 50 seats that were, ours was in an abandoned car barn, one of them was in an abandoned dairy, one was in a garage. These little theaters sprang up.
Folding chairs?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it was a space.
It was a space. So even today, anyone who grew up in the theater, if you show them a black room, their eyes light up. They say, wow, this is great. I could do anything here. And indeed you could, because one of the other secrets that we learned was that stage design is very, very difficult. There was a guy called Adolf Appia, who's a great designer in the early 20th century. He said, the set doesn't make any difference. He said, what makes a difference is the correlation between the stage and the audience. It's an amphitheater, right? And in fact, if you look at an amphitheater, what set could you put on the amphitheater to make it better? So is it possible to do a set which is better than a bare stage? Yes, but it's very, very difficult. So my thing has always been, if you can do it on a bare stage and keep the audience's attention, it's going to be hard to beat it. In fact, if you can do it right, you can do it on a radio. You don't need a set. And we had a little theater at the Goodman Theater. A guy called Greg Mosher came in. The Goodman was an old death house in Chicago. And Greg took it over and turned it into a great theater and hired all of us. And he had a little space, the second space theater, which was, I think, 80 seats. And it's always true that if you have a theater with a big space and an experimental space, nothing good is happening on the big space, right? It's all happening there. And it had a back wall. It was built in like 1920, a back wall, and it was plaster. And over the years, they'd painted up, they'd put on paint, they'd taken it off. They'd put up a mastic and taken it off. They'd put up, blah, 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 blah. And we always ended taking the set away because that, for some reason, was the most magnificent. It was like Pollock if he could paint. And it was just stunning.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Have any of your works been used as radio plays? Do you know?
Oh, sure. I did a bunch of them as radio plays. Yeah. In fact, I think I did a few as radio plays last year for the BBC, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that. Have you ever done therapy?
Yeah, I did. What a waste of time. Jesus Christ.
Tell me about it.
Well, here's the thing. I've known in various capacities therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. And like any other profession, few of them were smart. Maybe one or two of them were wise. And I did a lot of reading about psychoanalysis when I was young. I got very interested in it. I read everything. And I realized that there's a kind of a cross-pollination between Stanislavski and Freud the coevals, right? And that the, quote, method as adopted here in the United States was taken from the teachings of Stanislavski and practiced by people who were all involved in therapy. And they were all communists, so they're also involved in the whole communist Marxist idea of self-revelation and sharing boobity-bobbity-boo. But I realized that most therapy that I've either participated in or seen those close to me participate in was a recitation of grievances. And it's like you said about the monk, right? You say, oh, I'm a bad monk.
Yeah.
Right? You're a fucking monk.
Yeah.
Dude.
You either are or you're not.
Yeah. So the recitation of grievances I saw cross-decked from my experiences in the theater lead to nothing. I know how this person feels. Who cares? The audience don't care. I want you to say the stupid lines. If the play's written well, they'll get the idea. You're just there to get the idea. So I had a bunch of terrible experiences with psychiatrists and like that before I came to realize that absent the stuff you could get out of either Uncle Joe, don't worry, you'll grow out of it.
Yeah.
Right? Or a good clergy person, shut up and obey the rules.
Yes.
Or, if you're really fucked up, some psychological drugs, they got nothing to offer. Here's the thing. If you go into the theater, you have to pay something. You have to. You can't put on a play for free. Seriously, it could be a nickel, but just like they say it when the Jews do the census, you have to put a half shekel in the box. Let them put a quarter in. That allows them to believe. It triggers them into being able to suspend their disbelief.
They're investing in that experience.
Exactly. They're investing in the experience. If you don't invest in the experience, you don't believe, right? So they have to invest something. But the opposite is true, too. When you go to therapy like that, most of the people, and there are, of course, a few exceptions, you're also investing for the right to believe in something which is not true, which is that complaining or finding the reason that you cheat on your wife is somehow going to free something. It's just not true. People do not act badly and feel upset because of something they saw in the closet 45 years. It's just not true. Mm. So that's what I think about therapy.
Your main character in House of Games was a therapist who had written a successful book.
Yeah.
And there's a scene at the end I wanted to ask you about. She looks different. She's dressed in flowers instead of her old uniform. And her friend leaves the table and she steals a lighter from the next table.
Yeah.
What did you mean by it?
That's what I meant by it. That throughout the thing, Joey Mantegna's saying the broad's bent. Yeah. Right? If she weren't bent, she wouldn't be going all of this stuff.
So she's proving him right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the old joke, right? There's the hypochondriac and goes to little kid, get taken to the therapist. He says, I've determined the root of your son's problem. He's a thief. So there. Also, we see this whole idea of the primacy of therapy, which is it's completely self-referential. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. We're all self-referential all the time, unless we do a bunch of yoga and so forth, because our mind is a monkey mind. But it leaches over into identitarian politics and the criminal justice system. Oh, I wonder why the guy did that. You see it every day on the news. You look like you're so healthy that you don't watch the news. I don't
watch the news.
Yeah, I got to stop it. It's just fucking bullshit. Yeah. But they say, well, went in and he killed his mother and father. I wonder what his motives were. Well, A, it's who would know, and B, so what?
So much of today's life happens on the web. Squarespace is your home base for building your dream presence in an online world. Designing a website is easy, using one of Squarespace's best-in-class templates. With the built-in style kit, you can change fonts, imagery, margins, and menus, so your design will be perfectly tailored to your needs. Discover unbreakable creativity with Fluid Engine, a highly intuitive drag-and-drop editor. No coding or technical experience is required. Understand your site's performance with in-depth website analytics tools. Squarespace has everything you need to succeed online. Create a blog, monetize a newsletter, make a marketing portfolio, launch an online store. The Squarespace app helps you run your business from anywhere. Track inventory and connect with customers while you're on the go. Whether you're just starting out or already managing a successful brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create and customize a beautiful website. Visit squarespace.com/tetra and get started today.
At any point in your life, were you interested in magic? Like card tricks, magic?
Sure, but I got interested in magic not as a practitioner, but through my association with Ricky Jay, who was the greatest magician, maybe the greatest performer of the 20th century, and I did many, many things with him. And
How'd you meet him?
he was in the park, he was doing Shakespeare in the park, and I saw him performing magic. And I was talking to Jules Fisher, the great lighting designer, who's a great friend of Ricky, and I said, oh, I wonder if he'd come over and perform for my 30th, 40th birthday, something like that. They said, you're crazy, Ricky doesn't do that. But so we called Ricky. Ricky comes over and performs. So I fell in love with him. I said, geez, this guy's a great actor. So I did many movies and television shows with him. One of them you might enjoy is I did a Funny or Die called Lost Masterpieces of Pornography. And he's introducing the lost masterpieces of pornography. And it's Eddie O'Neill and Kristen Bell in a porn movie from 1935 that takes place in the robing chambers of the Supreme Court. It's called June Crenshaw, Sex Kitten to the Supreme Court. And Ricky's introducing it. So we talked all the time about the difference between magic and drama. And the Aristotelian idea that you have to use the mind to lead people to a conclusion which is both surprising and inevitable.
So drama works the same way as magic,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about the Phil Spector project.
You know, I ran into a long-lost relative of mine. There aren't too many Mamets, but there's one in New York who's working at Yeshiva University. And she's the granddaughter of my cousin, Eddie the cop. Eddie Mamet was a cop for 40 years. And he was there, and they asked me to speak at Yeshiva. And then Eddie's son came over, and they started talking about the history of my family in Poland. And they said, well, you know, we're actually specters. He said the Mamets were an offshoot, that the whole blah, blah, blah. Phil Spector, so I'm probably related to Phil Spector.
When did you find this out?
2 weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, so somebody called me up. Who was maybe Barry Levinson called me up, something like that. Said, you want to do this movie about Phil Spector? And then he took it to HBO, and I talked to HBO over there. And I said, yeah, okay, I'd love to do a movie about Phil Spector. I want to do it with Al. And the deal is, you got to leave me alone, you know. I'll do it. Do the best job I can. See you at the opening. So they said, okay. The fools. So anyways, we were doing Phil Spector, having the time of our life with Bette Midler, and she threw her back. I was like 2 weeks into the shooting. Heartbreaking. We had to close down. And I asked Helen Mirren earlier if she would do it. She said, I'm busy. And then she said, no, I'm going on vacation with my husband. I'm beat. And I called her up. She was on vacation, Helen, in Spain with her husband on a Friday. And she said, I'll be there Monday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Did you write the script?
Yeah.
And did you ever meet Phil?
I didn't meet him, but somebody invited me that I want to go see him. He was in the joint. And I said, no, I'm making up a story. You know, I'm not recasting a story. And I asked Al, and Al said, no, I don't want to meet him. I want to do my own thing. So.
How did you decide on Al?
Well, I love Al. I mean, I've worked so often with Al.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a new movie now. I'm trying to put together this new movie, and he said he'd take a part in it if he's free.
That'd be great.
It's the same old story about this new movie. It's another confidence game movie about these two guys who find this rich Mark who's a dealer in Americana, and he's also gay. And so what they want to do is sell him the Abraham Lincoln letter that proves that Abraham Lincoln was gay. And they've been waiting for years to find this perfect thing, and as they go to the forger, and it's pretty cool.
It sounds great.
Yeah, and John Malkovich said he played one of the guys and went to see who's going to play the other one of the guys.
So when you're writing a story about a real person, in the case of Phil Spector, how do you research? Or do you research? You just make up from scratch?
Yeah, Shel Silverstein, who was my closest friend, he said, never do research. When you do research, you're just reading bullshit written by somebody who didn't do research. So the problem with biography is, I was thinking a lot about in reading your book, the question is, what do you throw away, what do you keep, right? I'm always working with this question. So I always knew that a good writer is going to keep what others throw away, but he also is going to throw away what others keep. So if you're looking with a biography, there's all this stuff. It's very difficult because if you're dealing with someone who's putting up the money, they're going to say, wait, where does he chop down the cherry tree, right? Or wait, where does he blah, 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 or this or that, and the next thing. So the problem is with writing biographies to throw this stuff away, to say, what's the actual story?
Yeah.
And then take it from there and let your imagination work.
And when you say story, do you mean story or essence of the character?
There isn't any essence of the character.
It's just story.
Yeah. Aristotle said that. He says there's no such thing as character. Character's just habitual action. That's all we know about anybody. Anything other than that is narration. That's how we understand characters. All anybody understands. What does the guy do? That's his character. So for the writer and for the actor, both, there's no such thing as a character. The audience will get the idea. They imagine a character based on what the actor does and the words coming out of his mouth.
So the people in the audience imagine a different character depending on who they are. Would that be accurate?
Well, yes, and it's very much like listening to a radio personality. It's an illusion. They think that they imagined something, but they didn't. Because if you ask them, well, okay, describe to me,
it. They can't.
They can't. So it's an illusion. You can leave it out. Because art is all about what can you leave out, and it's still there.
Do you think of yourself as spiritual in any way?
Oh yeah, sure.
Tell me how.
Well, I mean, God, it amused God to put me here, and
So you're a believer.
oh yeah, sure.
Do you pray?
Sure.
How do religion and show business work together?
They don't. But show business is the bastard child of theater, which is, of course, the bastard child of religion.
So it all starts with religion.
Sure. It all starts with with connection. It's all metaphysics, right? It's a connection to something beyond our consciousness, which nonetheless we intuit is true. But it's true in a way different than fire burns. But it's true nonetheless.
Describe more.
I think everybody believes in God. I think we just call it by different names. And some of them actually call it the devil, and some of them, it actually is the devil, whether they call it that or not. So if you read the Torah, which I do, it's all in the Torah. What does God want you to do? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. You want some extra tips? Okay, here's 10 commandments. You want some extra tips in addition to that? Okay, here's several Jewish observances. These are all designed to calm our mind such that we're receptive to higher power. That's what they're designed for. If we, like your monk, you do them, you're going to get the benefit. If you don't do them, you're going to pay the price. So rational human beings devote so much energy to saying, that can't be true, right? It's not that God doesn't exist, but he's doing a rotten job. I think I could do a better job than that. Let me make up all these laws and rules and regulations. And P.S., I'm going to throw out anything that says it's religious because that's irrational. But if you look at human beings, we're all irrational constantly. If you look at what's on the news, which, it's absurd and it's evil. So if you don't say God exists, then it's very easy to say, well, obviously then evil doesn't exist either. But wait a second, how do I account for the fact that everything's screwed up? It's those guys over there.
Is there any benefit for rationality?
Of course.
Tell me.
Well, to distinguish between this and that, right? If you can't distinguish between this and that, you're a vegetable, right? Is it reasonable to let women get beat to shit because for someone says that men should be able to compete against them? Is it reasonable, right? So reason is very, very important. So the Hebrew word for reason is bina, which means between. I judge between this and between that. I use my reasonable capacity. But on the other hand, we have the monkey mind. How do we deal with it? One way we deal with it is through art. Freud said that music is polymorphous perversity, right? It affects us in this extraordinary way that feels very much like reasonable propositions, but it's not. So whoever rises from his prayers have been answered. If we rise from experience of art, something beyond ourselves, our prayers have been answered, right? It's not going to cure world hunger, right? But we become a little bit less devilishly insane for the 4 minutes of a song or the 2 hours of a play.
So you're describing it as beyond entertainment.
Yeah.
It has a higher purpose.
Yeah.
It does for me.
Yeah, for me too. Listen, it's easy to entertain people, to get their attention through sadism and pornography, which is what most television and movies now are, right? But it doesn't have any affect other than the moment, other than its capacity to impel addiction, because it means you have to do it again. You have to do it again. You have to do it again. Because, yeah, okay, now they finally took off their clothes and they're engaging in X, Y, and Z. Now what? Well, they're going to take off more clothes? But because you can't, what's the next step? Sadism. In effect, snuff films, which is what Luigi Mangione is, and what all the anti-Israel rioting is about. Right? It's because we tried the best thing we know how, which is people fucking constantly, and it didn't work. What's next? Physical violence and murder.
Have you ever been censored?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I got blacklisted all the time. Yeah, sure.
How?
Well, people just lost my number, right? They said, we can't do his plays because he's a whatever. I don't know what the hell.
Have any works been banned?
I don't know if it's been banned, but, they've certainly been saw. I had somebody want to do some plays of mine the other year, and they went out to all the theaters here, the Mark Taper Forum and the Kirk Douglas and blah. They said, no, we can't touch him.
How is playwriting different from other kinds of writing?
Finally, playwriting is reducing a unidirectional human interchange into dialogue. That's all it is. So it's hard to do. Somebody asked John Barrymore, what are your favorite 10 plays? He said, there aren't 10 good plays.
I love John Barrymore.
I love him too.
Do you remember the first time you saw one of your pieces performed?
Yeah, I think it was in Chicago. It's a piece called The Duck Variations in Chicago, a little theater, like 50-seat theater. It was great. Yeah.
What was the experience? How did it change from the page to the stage?
Well, it didn't change much from the page to the stage because the actors were really good. Changes from the page to the stage if the actors want to get a good idea. And Henry Fonda said that they gave him his first Oscar, one of our great actors. Never got an Oscar. They gave him one for Lifetime Achievement Award. It means thanks die now, right? He said, I want to thank all the directors who cured me of my good ideas.
Yeah. Are you ever surprised by what you see on a stage?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And ever in a good way or only in a bad way?
Well, no, many times in a good way. People do something saying, my God, that's genius. Like Hemingway, he's writing in Death in the Afternoon, and he and a friend are in Barcelona and they're watching the great bullfighter. I think it might have been Manolete. And Manolete performs a pass. the horns of the bull are so close, and Manolete moves so little. And he and his friend look at each other and they just shake their heads like that.
How could you do it? How
How
can
did he
it
do?
be?
So I've had that experience many times watching actors.
LMNT, Element Electrolytes. Have you ever felt dehydrated after an intense workout or a long day in the sun? Do you want to maximize your endurance and feel your best? Add Element Electrolytes to your daily routine. Perform better and sleep deeper. Improve your cognitive function. Experience an increase in steady energy with fewer headaches and fewer muscle cramps. Element Electrolytes. Drink it in the sauna. Refreshing flavors include grapefruit, citrus, watermelon, and chocolate salt. Formulated with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium to keep you hydrated and energized throughout the day. These minerals help conduct the electricity that powers your nervous system so you can perform at your very best. Element Electrolytes are sugar-free, keto-friendly, and great tasting. Minerals are the stuff of life. So visit drinklmnt.com/tetra and stay salty with Element Electrolytes. LMNT.
How is a play different than a film?
Well, in a film, you get to eat popcorn, and at a play, you get to read your program.
Beyond that.
Well, it's completely different, right? Because watching a film is a construction, finally, by the director, working as the comptroller and as the architect and as the designer. So the French come along with this auteur theory. I don't know what the fuck that means. Of course, who's making the movie if not the director? Except if the director is not making the movie and then the studio heads are, in which case one would be better not to have been born.
How did directing come into your life?
Well, I started directing because I went to the neighborhood playhouse school in theater in New York and studied for a year, and I had no idea what the teachers were talking about. It didn't make sense, and nobody could do it. The idea that you had to find something to substitute for blah, 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 and that you had to relate to your own experience, and they had them doing these silly games that made people more self-conscious. And so I saw that, and I learned so much watching the actors doing that. I said, no, there's got to be a better way. And so I wanted to stay in the theater because I loved the theater, loved it. I felt so at home there. But I couldn't be there as an actor. So I became a director with my own little theater companies, and there was nothing for us to do because we couldn't pay royalties. So I said, well, okay, so I wrote plays for them to do.
And then what was the first film you directed?
House of Games.
And how did that come about? How did you make the jump?
Well, I worked with Rafelson on Postman, and I followed him around. He said, follow me around, follow me around, follow me around. And so I was watching what he was doing. A lot of it I understood, and a lot of it I said, I think I could probably do it differently. And then I wrote these two movies for Peter Yates, the great director, Peter Yates. And he was going to direct them. The first one was House of Games. And at the last moment, he said, I can't do it. Why don't you do it? So I met this wonderful producer on Places in the Heart called Mike Hausman. And he said, yeah, I'll produce it for you. I said, well, I haven't directed a movie before. So he shepherded me through the process.
And good experience?
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wonderful.
What were you doing with Rafelson on the Postman movie?
I wrote the script for
I didn't realize you wrote it.
Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah. And we were shooting
Typically, when you write a script and someone else directs it, do they want input from you or do they want you to go away?
Both. I mean, two mutually exclusive ideas. Rapelson wanted me there. He didn't change anything. He wanted me there. A lot of people have asked me, well, I want to be there, but I said, fuck no. And for the most part, I don't want to be there. Anybody who's on a set who's not essential is deleterious. They're dragging it down. You got to be essential. So when I give the people a script, I'm saying, as far as I know, this is as good as it can be. If you shoot this, you paid me and you have my word on it, you're going to go up with a pretty good movie. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. But I got really sick of people taking both as a playwright and as a film director, people taking my work and misunderstanding it. So it's pretty fucking simple. Show up, say the words.
How has theater changed over the course of your life?
Theater?
Yeah.
Well, it's died, but it's always dying, right?
Yeah.
I was very fortunate because they changed the fire laws in Chicago, and because none of us had anything better to do, nor could we imagine anything better to do than putting on the plays. And so there we were, like 19, 20, 23 years old. All of us recognized, although we never said it, that was the best theater happening in the English-speaking world that night. We're having the time of our life. And it spawned the whole Chicago theatrical experience of Steppenwolf and St. Nicholas and the Organic Theater and Victory Gardens and Remains. There's a whole generation of people coming up. And then what happened, of course, is that things die because they're unsuccessful and things die because they're successful. So the neighborhoods became gentrified and went away. And the actors and directors and writers that became successful became gentrified and went away. And then New York became gentrified and went away because New York was the clearinghouse for American theater because it had an audience. The audience was mainly middle class and largely Jewish. And they knew what they would do and they patronized the theater. So when those people got priced out of existence, Broadway still existed, but who was going to come? Tourists. So because tourists are going to come, you're appealing to a very different clientele. So you have to get something that's going to attract them. You aren't going to say, oh, yeah. I remember that guy did the designs last year for Othello. I'm going to go see him because he's designing Lysistrata this year. So you had to put stars in, so the prices went up. And so the advertising budgets go up, and so, okay. It's like being the best boatman on the Erie Canal.
Do you think in the good days in Chicago, in the theater, the fact that there were maybe not high expectations was helpful in it being good?
No.
What do you think allowed it to be as good as it was?
We were on fire. What allowed the Beatles to be as good as they were, right?
Yeah.
Was it the humidity in the cellar? No, they're just fucking on fire. They got lucky. They found each other. They'd all been gifted by God. A little bit of symbiosis.
Tell me about your Kennedy assassination film project.
Oh, I wrote this great Kennedy assassination film that I was going to direct it and put everybody in. Everybody was in that film. Malkovich was in it. Shia LaBeouf was going to play Oswald. Al was in it.
It was a dramatic film.
Oh, yeah. So who else was in it? Viggo Mortensen was in it. John Travolta was in it. The cast just went on forever. They all read the script and said, yeah, you bet. Courtney Love was in it. Rebecca Pidgeon was in it. Everybody was in the book. Louis C.K. was going to do a part at one point. And then these guys came out of nowhere. They had a better idea than making a movie. They thought they'd just sue each other.
I don't understand.
Neither do I.
Is there a chance it will happen in the future?
I don't know. But it started out because Joey Mantegna called. He said there's this kid he grew up with called Nicky Solozzi, who was a part of the Giancana crime family. I think Giancana was his uncle in Chicago. And Nicky wrote this script about what was happening in Chicago when Accardo and Giancana decided to kill Kennedy. So I read the script. I said, yeah, okay. It was actually terrific. So I got together with Nikki and I said, yeah, this is terrific. I said, I'm going to have to rewrite it. If you want to do that, we'll split everything, blah, blah, down the middle. He said, sure. So I wrote the script and then I gave it to all my friends and they said, you bet. They said, I'll be in, do it for nothing. These great cinematographers and designers, they all get in, do it for nothing. And then, exactly.
Tell me about the Zapruder film.
I read this book. It was a compilation of articles by film historians, by cinematographers, and each one looks at the Zapruder film. And, I spent a lot of time in the cutting room and so forth, and I'm reading what they're saying. They say, yeah, there's stuff missing. It's just missing. The film disappeared. They took it and they shipped it from Dallas, where there was a Kodak facility, to LA, and then they shipped it back. And then I wrote a wonderful movie for Kate Blanchett, she was going to do for nothing, about the Zapruder film. And that fell apart too, unfortunately. Oh, that was a good movie. It's about the guy, and basically it's a guy called Slavko Vorkapich, who did all of the montage and process shots in movies, the trick shots that used to have to be done either in a camera or the lab. And he dies and he leaves his money to this woman, his granddaughter, who comes to the great house in Pasadena, finds out that he doesn't own the house, he has no money, he's getting $10,000 a month from some corporation. So the question is, why did they pay him? And it turns out that he was the guy who fixed up the Zapruder film.
Why a book of essays now?
Because I was going crazy this is my third book of kind of political socio-ruinations. First one was called The Secret Knowledge, the second was called Recessional, and this was the third one. Because, I'm getting old and I don't know if I'm retired or not, but the business has changed. It's more difficult to get stuff made because the people with whom I came up, who were a generation older than I, and now are a generation the same as I, and now we're a generation younger than I. And so the reaction is who? That's completely understandable. So I was looking around, I had too much time in my hands. So there's something I don't understand. What's happening to our society? So the answer is, of course, it's in the Bible. It's what's always happening to our society. Right? Good is fighting evil, and good intentions are fighting concerns for personal security and safety. And the people are turning back on God, and they're screaming at each other and shooting each other. And
in the new book, you compare yourself to Vanna White. Can you explain?
Oh, Vanna White, of course. Because Vanna White would come out and she'd gesture like this at the refrigerator. That was her job, right? And so she did it for years and years and years. I thought, well, yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. I'm gesturing at the refrigerator and saying, that's a refrigerator. So that's what the essays are about.
You wrote that democracy is an outgrowth of the Torah.
Well, sure. The whole idea of the Torah is they came to, I think, Hillel, the great sage, and they said, can you tell me the whole Torah standing on one foot? He said, yeah, I stood on one foot. He said, what's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. Now go study. So the Torah really comes down to that. And one of the differences between Judaism and our cousins, the Christians, is in the understanding of the golden rule. So the Christians say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But to the Jews, that's a foreign and incorrect statement, because what they would say is, I'm not going to do unto you as you would do unto me. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. No, I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to not do to you what I want you to not do it to me. Because that's more probative, right? I mean, who knows? I might be screwed up. I might want you to do this to me, and that's not a very good idea. But I certainly know what I don't want you to do to me, right? I don't want you to malign me, hit me, sue me, lie to me, those things. I'm not going to do that.
Tell me about the power of myth.
Well, it's all myth, right, isn't it? I mean, everybody believes in the myth. Part of what happened in the last election is people say, let's call a myth, right? That we shouldn't be jailed for suggesting that something may not be an actual fact, but a myth. that we should be able to differentiate between the two and make up our own minds about which is which. So you say, oh, you can't believe in Jesus. That's a myth, right? Or you can't believe in the fact that the Jewish people have always lived in, that's a myth. But on the other hand, you say, well, we need to apologize to the Mugwump Indians because we're on their line. That's not a myth. That's a fact. And if you say that's a myth, you're evil.
Yeah. You compare government to the mafia in the new book. Can you tell me more about that?
I mean, growing up in a machine town, which is basically a mafia town, that the Accardos and Gene Cos were in line with the Dems and with the Daily Machine and all that. But you say, what does the mafia say? Well, guess what? You have to pay me protection. If you don't, we're going to kill you, the mafia says. And the government says, oh, we're going to throw you in jail. Now, guess what? You have to buy our products, the mafia says. You have to buy our light bulbs, and you have to buy our electric cars, and you have to buy our shower heads. Oh, you don't like that? Oh, you're going to go to jail. Guess what? We're going to tell you who you can hire, the mafia says. You're going to hire my cousin Vinny over there. You're going to pay him too much money, or else we're going to blow up your dry cleaning establishment. Well, how is that different from affirmative action? Oh, guess what, they say? You're going to give me all your savings. I'm going to invest it for you, and it's probably not going to be there when you get back. What are you going to do about it, right? So the Constitution, and starting with the Declaration, is to protect us against government being oppressive. It's not to do good. It's not to elect people to do good. And the difference is the mafia doesn't say, I'm going to do good. They just say, dude, I'm going to break your kneecaps.
So they're similar, except the mafia might be more honest or more.
Well, yes, they're less hypocritical,
direct.
Certainly. Do it or else. What part of bang, bang don't you understand?
How much do you trust historical accounts?
That's a very good question. I guess I don't trust them very much at all. I tried to read a lot of them. But if you say, where's the information coming from? There were several really good books written about the South and the beginnings of the Civil War at that time. So I really enjoyed reading them. And one of them was Frederick Olmsted, who designed Central Park, was a great designer and a building designer, and invented the Red Cross, did all sorts of things. And he wrote a book called A Journey Through the Southern Slave States in 1855. And what I realized from that was what people are missing in Uncle Tom's Cabin is that the real evil is not Simon Legree, right? It's the people who said, well, what are you going to do? Yes, these are my slaves, but I treat them better. So that the horror in Frederick Olmsted's account and the horror in Uncle Tom's Cabin is the way the good people treat the still slaves, right? The guy says to Uncle Tom at the beginning, you've worked for me your whole life. I'm going to free you when I die, which is already, if you think about it, bullshit, right? People say Washington and Jefferson freed the slaves when they died. What's good about that? They wrung them dry and said, well, I have no use for you. Fuck it, off you go. So the guy runs into difficulties and says, Tom, you're such a great guy. You basically raised my children, but what can I do? I'm going to have to sell you down the river. What can I do? So that's...
Oh, that expression, sell you down the river. I never made the connection.
Yeah, so you
That's
farther
what
down
sell
south.
you down the river means.
Yeah.
Tell me about the 7-minute rule.
Ricky studied for years and years with two guys. He came out here to spend a week with a guy called Di Vernon in the 70s, who was the greatest stage magician of his day, and with a guy called Charlie Miller, who was a mechanic, which is to say he was a cheat at the card table. They're the two greatest card manipulators in history. And so Ricky studied with them for years and years and years and took care of him until he died. And Ricky was going up to the Magic Castle one day to meet Di, and he was late, and he comes up and his Di is in the parking lot, and he says, Di, I'm so sorry I'm late, I'm so sorry. And Di says, that's okay, I've been watching the way people put on their coats, right?
Yeah.
So watching the way people behave is fascinating. I was talking to my wife yesterday, went to this restaurant, I said, you know what? I said, if you take two women who are available, right, they aren't hooked up with anybody at this point in time, if they're out having lunch, they gesture more than people who are attached. And she said, oh, that's true. Unconsciously.
Did you just notice that?
I noticed that I just noticed that I noticed it.
In that moment, you noticed it.
I noticed that I'd always noticed it,
you always
but I wasn't
noticed
conscious of
Yeah.
it. Like, and I did this movie with Cheyenne. He's talking to, that's coming out called Henry Johnson, right, coming out. And he's talking to the kid, and he says, a woman, you're looking down the street, a woman looks away like that. Why does she do that? He says, I don't know. So she can get your attention. The movement catches your attention, right? Right? A woman puts her hair back or adjusts it. She doesn't say she's raising her breast. They do it unconsciously. But I realized that all people are reacting unconsciously to each other. They're completely unconscious of it. Like if you look, guys walking down the street, if you think you're more of an alpha male than they, a lot of them, they'll lower their eyes. Interesting. So I noticed that the question is, why is a scene 7 to 10 minutes long? And the answer is that unconsciously, we humans are programmed to check for danger at certain times. And that we make a little check at every 7 minutes, which is the length of a show when they had commercials, 7 minutes, boom. Kind of the length of a scene, length of a comedy sketch, length of a vaudeville sketch. And if you put 3 of them together, you make a much larger look at 20 minutes after the hour, and then at the 20 minutes to the hour. And the French say an ange passe, an angel passes at 20 minutes after the hour and 20 minutes before the hour. What does that mean? The silence descends because people are looking around. And if you go into a theater, most plays go up about 7 minutes after the hour, and the audience quiets down unconsciously. They aren't looking at the watches, they're talking. But at 7 minutes after the hour, they quiet down. So that's the 7-minute rule. So I was wondering about that because I was wondering about the Springbok. The Springbok is in a book. The Springbok is an African large goat, like a cross between a goat and a giraffe, an antelope. It's an antelope. And they spring up in the air and look around. They spring up in the air and look around, spring up.
Like on their hind legs?
They jump. They go right up in the air. And they're in flat lands. So they go up in the air to check about what's happening. They're in a big herd. They want to check about what's happening. So I said, now we know why the Springbok hops, right? But I started saying, when does it hop? When does it hop? So I said, well, obviously, there are Springboks that have built in this internal engine, right? And the ones that hit the number correctly are going to breed. And the ones that don't hit the number correctly are going to become food for the lion. So that becomes over time inbred.
Do you think the 7-minute rule applies to everything?
I don't know, maybe.
It might.
Yeah.
It might. Tell me about carnival barkers.
Carnival barkers. Well, Ricky was a carnival barker.
Was he?
Yeah. I loved carnivals. When I was a kid in Chicago, there was this place called Riverview, which was an old carnival, which became this huge amusement park. It was just filthy and full of all sorts of freaks. And they had all these, the carnival barkers. And the barkers, he would say, like, they're on the inside, folks, they're on the inside. See the world's living hermaphrodite, Adam and Eve, brother and sister, man and wife, in one single body, exhibited not to be rude or vulgar, no, but to show you one of nature's curious mistakes. See the electrode lady from Johannesburg, South Africa, she and her sister struck by 20,000 volts of electricity. Her sister died and she lived. The doctor said she lived because she was immune to the shock of electricity. Great. Ricky used to do that as part of the show that I directed. So the carnival barker, the point was to get you inside, right? Get you inside to show you the marvels that were inside.
Is there any equivalent to the Midway today?
I don't know. It's a good question. Might be. I grew up on, there's a space just south of basically Chicago, in Hyde Park, this long park, which was the Midway for the Columbian Exposition of 1893. And it's still there. And this was still referred to as the Midway. No, people don't realize
that's why
it goes back to the Columbian Exposition.
What's Signal 25?
Signal 25 is, people know that the old carnies chant, was "Hey Rube," which was the carnies would shout if the cops showed up or if the locals were turning on them. They would shout "Hey Rube," but that, like most jargon, by the time that became widely known, it was superseded by Signal 25. But by the time we figure out that was superseded by Signal 25, Signal 25 has been superseded by something else.
What do you believe that most people don't believe?
I believe in the devil.
What do you believe today that you didn't believe when you were young?
I don't believe that most people, including me, are good at heart.
And you thought that when you were young?
Sure. I was a red diaper baby.
Was there an event that changed that opinion, or just the wisdom of time?
You live long enough and you get out of the bubble, you're going to see a few things. You know, and Rebecca West said, nobody of a mature age looking around ever did not say, certainly the world is so evil that it must end soon. So there you are.
You mentioned the 12-step program several times in the book.
Yeah.
What's your relationship to AA?
My grandpa used to say it's the only great modern religion.
Yeah.
One of the wonderful things about it is that there's no infrastructure.
Yeah. Tell me about God.
Well, we don't know about God. I mean, that's part of the definition of God, right? That there is a reason that we're here. And my wife's father is a renowned physicist, and we talk a lot. And he's a complete agnostic, right? We get back to the Big Bang. Where did that come from? Well, we don't know. Well, okay.
I've heard it described as the first miracle.
Well, yeah. And if you look at the ancient wisdom in the Torah, I mean, obviously it's Jewish wisdom, but a lot of it goes back before that. I mean, sure, it comes from the Sumerians, and who knows where it comes from before that. Is people intuited the growth of life on Earth, from the sea, right, to the crawling creatures, to the mammals, to man. And they also intuited or observed the growth from the family to the state to despotism. And they also intuited the growth of technology to the point where it overrides a devotion to God and kills us. It's called the Tower of Babel. So it's extraordinary. It's all in the Torah. It's all there. This is ancient wisdom that people said, oh, wait a second. Ain't that funny? Let me figure this out.
Would it be helpful for everyone to study the Bible?
No. No, it'd be helpful for people to study the Bible if they want to study the Bible.
Are you always writing?
I think I unfortunately am. You know, I just finished a movie, and I just finished a couple of books, and I got a couple of books more I got to finish. And I'm sure my last thought, whenever that's going to be, is, well, wait, I'm not done yet, but
Yeah.
you know, someone else is going to be in charge of that.
Yeah. From the idea to the execution of a project, does it typically happen quickly, or might it take a long time?
Takes as long as it takes. You know, some plays I worked on for many years, batting my head against the walls, I couldn't figure it out. Some plays I worked quickly. But I think of the Plains Indians had a dance called the Buffalo Dance that ensured the return of the buffalo. And it never failed. Every year when the buffalo was supposed to return, they did the buffalo dance. And the reason it didn't fail is if the buffalo didn't show up that year, they kept doing the fucking buffalo dance until the buffalo came back.
Yeah.
So that's why I think of myself. I'm going to do the buffalo dance until the buffalo comes back.
Yeah. Are there any things that you have a notion to write, but for whatever reason, you don't bring yourself to do it?
No,
You follow up on all of the inspiration. Is inspiration the right word?
I think so. I mean, what do I know? The whole thing is a mystery to me.
Yeah.
Sandy Koufax wrote some pamphlets explaining how to throw a fastball over 100 miles an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should take a look at the one if you haven't seen them. And he has all sorts of diagrams and angles and that, okay? So it makes sense to him, right?
Yes. Yeah. In story structure, is there any benefit to randomness?
I always thought of randomness was like you go to a mentalist, right? You go to a psychic. There's one thing that they'll always say. You know what it is? They'll always say, you know, you have psychic powers too. You've felt that, haven't you? Right? So a lot of people think they have a book in them or a movie in them or a poem in them because they understand you can take random thoughts and put them together and they sound a little bit different than human speech. So perhaps they're poetry, but that's not what I do for a living.
Tell me about campfire songs.
Oh, I love campfire songs, yeah. Yeah, we loved singing them songs. And I've been writing a lot of songs lately. I write a lot of them with my wife, and she does the music, and a lot of them I love writing songs. And one of the songs I wrote was, I was thinking about Frankie and Johnny, which was a campfire song. I'm thinking, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Why is it Frankie and Johnny? Because a lot of these songs that become part of our consciousness are adopted from the pornographic. For example, people saying it's a long way to Tipperary, right? What they really sung was that's the wrong way to tickle Mary, right? And the people say John Brown's body lies a moldering, but what they really sang was John Brown's body, it's a 14-inch long dick, right? And so I was thinking about Frankie and Johnny, and I said, well, obviously they're lesbians, right? So I rewrote that whole thing of Frankie and Johnny.
Are those stories apocryphal, or are those?
No, that's all true.
Those are true.
Yeah.
And
like bless them all was, of course, fuck them all.
Really?
Yeah.
Is there any part of the system that isn't corrupt?
Is there any human action which isn't corrupt? You know, they used to say in Vermont, only two things money can't buy is true love and homegrown tomatoes. We're corrupt. I am and you are, because our mind is corrupt. Duh. It says that in the Bible, it's at the beginning. What's the snake doing there?
Tell me the limits of language. How close can you get to saying what you really are experiencing? Or is that not important?
I don't know, but I was struck by what you said about even if someone's wrong, that's information, right? So that's how I feel about me, right? I don't know what I'm really fucking feeling. I know what I'm writing.
No one knows anything.
Well, as somebody said, how do I know what I think till I've heard what I say?
Yeah. What is 0 point?
Well, 0 point is something that one of the Russian film theorist, I think Podovkin, said, there's some point where if you have a 3-act structure where the action has to stop, between Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 2 and Act 3, the hero runs out of ideas. That's the 0 point, right? Prior to that, everything in the first act is one scene leading to a second scene, which leads to a third scene. It all makes sense until they finally run out of ideas. So where's the new thing going to come from? Because you're between the inhalations and the exhalations of the Buddha. Something has got to emerge which changes the direction that the hero takes. So that's the 0 point. So it's a very, very helpful concept because both the hero and the writer have to be out of ideas.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you know what happens already, once in a while you do, so does the audience.
Yeah. Do you think about that when you're writing, or no?
Yeah.
You do?
Sure.
You focus on the structure?
Oh, yeah, it's all I focus on.
Do you ever write where the first draft is too long? Or
Sure.
You do?
Oh, yeah, I rewrite constantly. Because, every time you write it, you say, that's great. Come back tomorrow, you say, it's garbage. And eventually, you get to something else. You say, okay, now I understand what the project wanted to tell me. Now I've gotten away from my preconceptions.
You start with preconceptions and then the project reveals itself.
Yeah, it's like this, I can play anything in the world in the key of F, right? I don't give a shit, right? The Star-Spangled Banner or the Mendelssohn E flat. But my fingers are always going to go to where they know the best way to play in the key of F is, right? I got to play an F sharp. I got to rethink everything to break past the obvious.
Yeah.
Because my mind is going to go to the obvious.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
How did the Merchant Marines change you?
Oh, I was just in for a summer, but I thought it was wonderful because I, got to look at a different part of the world that you don't get to see.
And what was it like? What did you take away from it?
Well, I loved it, and one of the wonderful things was coming back into Chicago, down through the Sault Ste. Marie. When you're looking at Chicago is very beautiful. The lakefront is very beautiful, and you're going from Chicago to East Chicago, Indiana. It's very, very beautiful. And you put on your going ashore clothes, but by the time you walk 1 mile to the gate of Inland Steel, you're stone black, covered in soot and ash. But I met some interesting people there.
Tell me what you remember about Glengarry Glen Ross from the original inception.
I was working in a phone room selling land over the telephone, and at some point, I started writing about it. I was at a restaurant, and I was listening to somebody at the next booth. You couldn't see who they were. They were talking. I couldn't make out what they were talking about. I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So I wrote one scene about that, and another one. And so then in the whole thing, I said, okay, now how do all these things come together now? But what I loved was the whole idea that people don't recognize, because and it's being played so well, that they're being asked to participate in a vocabulary and an organization that they can only understand by listening harder. The opposite is, well, here we are in a laundromat, right? That was Glengarry Glen Ross. We did it in Chicago, which was wonderful. Greg Moshe directed it. And with the exception of Robert Prosky, no one knew who any of those people were. We went to New York, and I just kicked everybody's tushy.
How did winning the Pulitzer Prize change your life?
It was pretty great. It's the American equivalent of being knighted. So it's a nice thing to have. Sure, why not?
How do you say you learned your craft?
The only way you can learn playwriting is through an audience. Anything else is a waste of time, because you can't fool the audience. Billy Wilder said, individually they're idiots, collectively they're a genius.
Oh, that's great. I never heard that.
And I've never met a dumb audience. They get it.
Yeah.
They paid, they showed up, they get it. They've suspended their disbelief.
You always assume they understand what's going on. You never lower the idea for them to get it.
Why would I do that? They're going to get it.
So much of what we see is done that way.
Yeah, sure.
Lowest common denominator.
Yeah, it's done by idiots who imagine somebody dumber than themselves. But if they imagine that, there is nobody dumber than themselves.
That's great. The Verdict, you wrote the script, but it was based on a different story, yes? The story existed?
It was based on a book. The guy who was the lawyer for the woman that wrote a book, and I wrote the script.
How is that process different, writing a script based on a book instead of starting from scratch?
Well, it's different because you have to throw so much out, because people don't know how to read scripts, nor should they, right? Even most people in the movie business, I don't think they even do read scripts. They read coverage. So if they say he came into the room and you knew immediately he was a doctor because he had that look in his eye, although you might deny your immediate impressions because of the incredibly expensive gold Rolex watch on his watch. How, you wondered, could he put these two things together? They love that shit, right?
Yeah.
But you can't, how do you film that? It doesn't make any difference. So if you take a book, the first thing you have to do is eviscerate it. You have to say, what is the actual story? So if I say to you, you read that book, what's the story? You say, oh, this guy, he found $1 million in the thing and his son stole it from it. Okay, now I can write that story. Yeah. You don't say, well, you really have to understand the town in which he grew up, right? We're going to start with the description of his parents and how they came to fuck Phil in 1902 and how he grew up in a dysfunctional family, but yet one day he married the rich woman who say, what's the story? What's happening? What's the story? So we know this because if we say, oh, I saw a movie last night, I say, what's it about? You tell me the story.
Yeah.
If you start saying it has great visuals, that means it's a crock of poop.
Have you ever seen a great movie that didn't have a great story?
I don't think so, no. Here's something I realized. All of us know when the scene we're about to see is pointless. How do we know? We get up to pee. Why do we get up to pee then? If the thing keeps our attention, we don't get up to pee. we know from the first second that nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So audiences are super, super smart.
How do you think your plays differ from the plays that came before you?
Milton Friedman says that culture is an absolute inheritance, that the way that we deliver the milk or install the plumbing or train the military is an absolute inheritance, that we're building on what others have done, and the same thing is true in the theater. So I'm building on what others have done, the very fact that the theater exists. And as I say, I got certain inspirations, and also I have certain bad examples, where I looked at, for example, the plays of Eugene O'Neill, and I saw the only thing wrong with them is anyone who ever left wanted to kill themselves. You know, it's
So you
just,
could learn by rejecting things from the past.
sure. So, and I still do it today, and I do it all the time. And I'm looking at a movie and say, wait a second, why does this not work? Or why does this work? Or how would I fix this to make this better? And I used to do that with Shell all the time. We'd say, yeah, I heard this joke, but it doesn't quite work, or blah, blah, blah. Or there's this song lyric that blah, blah wrote. How do we fix it? The idea being that these entities exist in a metaphysical world independent of their perception, and that we can say, okay, I got to tweak it a little bit. My wife, for example, her mother's a very famous yoga instructor. So my wife grew up doing yoga. She does a lot of yoga every day, and so Iyengar yoga. And so what she learned from her mother, you do yoga?
I've done it.
Okay. So what she learned from her mother and what she tries to teach me, lummox that I am, is move the hip a quarter of an inch here, right? Okay. Lower your shoulders a quarter of an inch there. Oh, now it begins to make sense.
You keep a diary?
I probably do. I have my little quote workbook, and I got 60 years of them. And I used to write like a 10, 15 page scene every day, and write movies then. And I also write, oh, why was I born? Why have you deserted me, oh God, after everything I've done for you? That kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
Dear diary, I wonder if Jim really likes me. And
Do you ever look back at them?
no.
Is the purpose of it, by writing it, you get to release it from your head?
Maybe. Yeah.
There's got to be some reason if you don't look back to do it.
I know. I don't know what it is. I guess it's, I remember I've done something, because I was just in my stupid head. But my hands are all shot, so it's very hard for me to type and hold this. So I just complain.
Do you still play piano?
Yeah, I play piano every day, yeah.
Great. How's your relationship to writing changed over the course of your life?
It hasn't.
Same.
Yeah.
How are you most misunderstood?
I don't know. My wife said to me the other day, she says, Dave, I think you really don't care about what other people think of you. I said, well, that may be true. Maybe true. I'd rather be liked than not liked, but what the hell? They're as fucked up as I am.
Do you remember your dreams?
I remember them until I forget them. Yes.
Do you ever write them down?
No. Well, one of the things I learned from dreams and from reading Freud, who's mainly full of shit, but he said he understood the meaning of the interpretation of dreams. Well, he's about 500,000 years too late. But one of the things I remember about my dreams that helps in the writing is it's always the overlooked something that doesn't belong that's going to be the key to understanding of the dream, the drama. What have I left? What have I forgotten? Why did I write there was a dog in scene 2 and I never came back to the dog? Either the dog was wrong in that place, doesn't belong, or it needs to pay off over here.
Does it always have to make sense, what you're writing?
Sure.
But in life, things don't always make sense.
Well, yeah, I'm not doing life. I don't know nothing about life.
Does a story start at the beginning and work its way to the end, or might you start with something and you realize, oh, this is really the ending?
Yeah, well, of course.
It could happen anyway.
Yeah, it could happen any way at all. So the idea is, what do I got? Where does it belong? And sometimes it sits in a drawer for 20 years. And sometimes I'm not going to get up until I finish it. Sure.
How does a theater company work?
Well, the theater company, in its perfect form, you have to be young, right? Because people need to be devoted to the company more than to their families and more than to their other careers. So these companies in which I grew up with were the only really legitimate socialist enterprises that I've ever experienced. Everyone says, our devotion is to the company. We're going to make money and support the company. If I write it, you're going to act in it. If you write it, I'm going to act in it. If someone needs to build a set, you got to do it because I'm taking the tickets. It's marvelous. The nice thing about it, as opposed to a commune, was Daddy was never paying for it. Everybody was completely mature and a devoted member of a group.
What do you think drew you to the theater in the first place?
The girls, certainly, and the fun. Also, people used to say, nobody likes a smart aleck, nobody likes a smart ass. And it was the first thing that I knew from the grown-ups said that wasn't true. Because I liked smart alecks. I like being a smart aleck. So you get to go on stage and be a smart aleck and entertain the people. How great.
Did you go to the movies a lot when you were a kid?
Oh, all the time, yeah.
What were things that you remember, favorite movies?
You were very fortunate in Chicago because on Skid Row, on Clark Street, there was a theater called the Clark Theater, and it was bums and derelicts and homeless, and it was open 24 hours a day, and they changed the double bill every day. And the guy who ran it was a cineophile. He was a genius.
Every day?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Double bill every day. So he'd say, now we're going to have a week of Jimmy Cagney films.
Wow.
We're now going to have a week in which titles were done by Saul Bass.
Wow.
Right? Or now we're going to have a week in which Saul Polito did the cinematography.
That's your whole education.
Oh, man. So we all used to go all the time in high school. You couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, just go down and watch the movie.
Great.
It was magnificent.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other experiences you can think of like that you were lucky to experience?
Sure. Well, my movie House of Games premiered in Chicago, around the corner from there, at the Fine Arts Theater. And I was up watching it in the projection room, and the guy said, yeah, this is an arc light projector, or actually it's flame going through two blocks of light, whatever the fuck it is. It's the last one in America.
Wow.
And it gave such a magnificent project. So if you go and look at restorations of black and white films, for example, they did Stagecoach at the Arrow, and it was completely restored. And you realized what black and white was really about. Yeah. And what it was about was the blacks, because they had this nitrate stock, silver nitrate, was silver, that eventually it all just blew up or disintegrated. Actually, I'm premiering my new movie at the Arrow. Do you know about that?
No.
Oh, I did this movie with Evan Jonicott and Shia LaBeouf, and we did it as a play in Venice, then I shot it as a film called Henry Johnson, and it premieres at the Arrow Theater on the 9th of May.
Amazing.
And it's really good, and I think one can also get it online, a Henry Johnson film or something like that.
Taking something that starts as a play, how do you reset it in a film? Or do you just shoot the play?
No, you don't just shoot the play. You got to say, okay, let me start from zero. All I got is what the people say. What are the people doing? Because if I shoot it correctly, you can turn off the sound. Like with any movie, if it's a good movie, you don't need to hear what they say, right?
That goes against everything you've said up until this point.
Yeah. No, the words are important in the theater. The words are much less important in the movies.
Really?
Sure, it's about pictures. It's about pictures. Think about it, Guy shows up on stage, he says, Jesus Christ, I would do anything for a cigarette. The speech can go on forever, right? Guy shows up in a movie, takes out a pack of cigarettes, finds it's empty, right? Which is more effective in the film.
Yeah. Yeah, opening the drawers looking for the match when realized there are no matches left in the matchbook.
Yeah. So if you think about it, if you start thinking in images,
yeah,
there's nothing left in the thing. He tears it up, right? He sees a half a cigarette there, almost, and he takes it out. And now he doesn't have a match. He opens up the drawer. He's looking for the matches, and he sees a little box over there. And he takes the box. What are we all wondering?
What's in the box?
Yeah, this is right actually out of The Last Tycoon by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That's how he describes whole movies. Man, he's absolutely right.
Is it harder to take something from words to pictures or to take something from pictures to words?
It's a little harder, except even it's easier. And as somebody said, it might have been Curtis LeMay, he said, everything in war is simple, but everything that's simple is hard.
That's great.
Yeah.
Athenaeum is a new podcast on the Tetragrammaton network.
Do you know about the connection between Charlie Manson and MK Ultra, the US government's mind control operation? What if everything you thought you knew about the Manson murders was wrong? Join Ayesha Akambi for a once-in-a-lifetime in-depth conversation with Tom O'Neill, author of the runaway bestseller Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. In this limited deep dive series, Tom O'Neill unpacks his 20-year investigation into the CIA's mind control program, linking it to Charles Manson and the disturbing secrets buried in America's history. From missing FBI files to Hollywood cover-ups, government surveillance, LSD, and the dark collapse of the 60s hippie dream. This is the story behind the story. It's not true crime, it's true chaos. Hear it on Athenaeum, the new podcast on the Tetragrammaton Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts. Truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's far more dangerous.
Coming soon on the Athenaeum podcast.